What up, world? It's your boy Mark Walter Ward, Super Fact Show, Super Fast Network. Today we got with us stand-up comedian, one of my favorite podcasters, Steve Osborne. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, thanks for joining. I mean, not like stalkery or anything, but when House of the, I'm one of those people that like, I'm somewhat of a completionist. So when House of the Dragon started, I listened to podcasts on it. I didn't go down the Reddit like I did with Game of Thrones because that just takes up too much time. But I
Absolutely.
reread my book. I'm like one of them people. So I found your podcast, Double Dragon, which quickly became one of my favorites. And then the Cocoons of Horror podcast. I went back and listened to everything but the Stranger Things episodes. And I gotta say, brother, you're one of the funniest people I've ever heard on a podcast.
Oh, well, look at me. I'm a blush here on Zoom.
How there you go. I was telling my wife, like one of them that I really liked. I like when you said is a Lincoln beard the moral opposite of a Hitler mustache.
Yeah, that's right. See, that's the thing that's funny about doing podcasts. Like, my partner Anthony Lidon, he'll be like, "Oh, you like," he'll text me something I said, and I'm like, I don't have any recollection. I just,
Just off the
when you're,
cuff, huh?
yeah, when you're just riffing, it's funny. Like, sometimes you think you're running material, but you have to go back and try to find something that, hey, maybe I can use that later.
Got you. Um, on House of the Dragon, the abbreviation Hot D took off across a lot of podcasts. I'm not sure if y'all used it, but I was curious. Well, like your take on it. I wonder why Got Hot D didn't take off. Like why it was just Hot D. When you got the
Yeah,
Game
that's
of Thrones on top of it. You could have had little Got Milk looking shirts and all that stuff.
for sure. Yeah, got hot D has that's yeah, that seems like you could sell that, regardless of if you're a fan. I mean, really.
Well, hey, feel free to run with it. I haven't heard any podcast use it. So was your overall impression of House of the Dragon favorable?
Yeah, I think so. Like I feel like towards the end, I mean, because it's definitely a show that it's the whole thing sets up, right? I mean, like the entire this is a backstory, and it's going to have its own crescendo, its own story arc. But it unlike so because it doesn't lead directly into Game of Thrones, but it sort of leads to the lore. So this particular season, because of the time jumps and because of how it's setting up, ultimately the Dance of the Dragons. Um, it it feels like prologue, even though I kept on thinking that like, oh, okay, that episode was prologue, that episode was prologue. Like then you go, oh, this whole thing might be prologue, right?
Right.
And that's not a bad thing. It's just and I like to have a little patience, so that maybe could have done without some of the time jumps, but looking back, and some of those time jumps are covering eras of peace, and you probably don't want to sit through that anyway. I mean, it's you get the idea, but I think overall I was very satisfied with it. I liked where it left off. I definitely like ready for the next season, which now I guess it got pushed out another year, so we'll see what happens there and then for the podcast in between. But I liked it. Is it Game of Thrones level? Maybe not, but I mean, we're looking back through a lens of one of the greatest series of all time. So to give one season, to say is it Game of Thrones, is it not? I think it's pretty great on its own. I think it exists without Game of Thrones. I think it's compelling. So overall, I'd probably give it in the B plus A minus overall. I don't know how
You
you felt.
about that? As I guess. How would you say it? Like a medium Dinklage?
That's right. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I definitely say that. Well, it's probably like maybe a Dinklage minus one, right? I mean, so
Yeah, there you
overall
go.
very satisfied. I think there was only like one episode that I was a little unhappy with. Not necessarily unhappy with, but like I felt more disjointed, and that I think was was episode 9. But overall, I'm like, well, I liked what it was doing with the story. I liked what it did to move some of the characters along. It just felt a little more jumbled, and that's I mean, you start nitpicking at that point, right? You start really like you start comparing to these. If you look at a show and go, well, that episode 8 was one of the best I've seen in Game of Thrones. Period. It's like now you got to compare the next episode to that, so maybe it's not fair to that next episode. You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Do you ever think that like analyze like over analysis gets in the way of people enjoying a good story?
Oh, sure. And like I know when you mentioned the Reddit rabbit trail, right? I mean, like Game of
Yeah.
Thrones, probably more so than any other series, created this a subculture that was almost beyond the show. And so like the show now is having to compete with rabid fan theories and and some of these fan theories take on life. You're like, ooh, I like that. Like, I mean, Star Wars was kind of the same way when you look at all like, but I know when before the prequels came out, everybody had a theory on how it should be set up, and this was like pre, Reddit and crazy internet days. But I don't know how many conversations I had over a few cold ones about what I think that the prequels should look like. And then by the time the prequels come out, now you're comparing it to this other, concept that was never on the table. So then now
Right.
it's being held to a standard that it never asked to be, right? And so I think the over analysis could definitely be an issue in terms of enjoying it. But on the flip side of it, I think like what we do with the podcast, and Anthony does his like real deep dives into like some of the more scholarly, medieval texts and things like that. But what I like about it is that you do a little close reading, and I think you do get an appreciation maybe from like a show like construction standpoint, like how are they telling this story, how are they moving these characters along, maybe just in terms of how they set them up with lighting and set them up with like the setting. And so for me, that I like to analyze too is like how the show is constructed, and then see how the story is sort of overlaid on that. So that's kind of like analysis I like to do, but you can analyze the joy out of something for sure.
I found that the medieval stuff on y'all show made me respect the technical accomplishments of House of the Dragon more.
Right. Yeah, and that's what's really something is that I like, because I don't know if you got the backstory on how I even got involved in this. Is that I had never seen Game of Thrones. My buddy, Anthony, he's written novels on it. He's done all this analysis and podcast, and he really wanted me to watch the show. And I was not much of a like a fantasy guy, so he said, with like during pandemic lockdown, he's like, why don't you watch Game of Thrones? Do a rewatch with me. I'm doing this book centric podcast, but it might be fun to go on this little journey with it. And so that was kind of a fun way to like pass the time, obviously when we're in lockdown. But it gave me an opportunity to. So I looked at it just much more like watching it as a show. I had no knowledge of what was going to happen, no spoilers. I didn't read any of the books, so I was purely watching it, kind of from an entertainment standpoint. But then with him, kind of as my caddy as I'm going through this golf course of Game of Thrones, like he's telling me little things to start looking for, and then I became a better viewer. And then so now by the time we got to House of the Dragon, like I was into it for that purpose. And it was kind of nice because he's got the book knowledge, but he doesn't have the show knowledge either. So we're watching it together for the first time. So that adds another element of like an analysis and kind of a little bit of like geeking out over some of the things we've seen.
When you said I did know most of that, how you came to be involved. I didn't know he had wrote novels. Are they available on Amazon?
Yeah, so he writes. I mean, when I say novels, I mean like they're accompanying pieces, right? Like, so he has analysis that he does on Game of Thrones, and because his background, of course, is he's like theology, and so he mixes in some medieval and some theology as well. So it's really yeah, it's a great accompanying, it's great analysis. So his that's his background, and he wants to move. I know, like he has ideas for fiction writing and things like that he wants to move towards. So I think this is kind of a natural springboard for him. He's kind of collecting information and learning so much from all these different scholars as well. So I think he's compiling some stuff. So who knows? Stay tuned. Maybe he'll have the next HBO series we got to be analyzing.
Hey, that'd be awesome. Shoot, he definitely seems like he's got a bedrock of knowledge of genres and themes and all that good stuff to pull from. So that'd be great.
Yeah,
So
smart guy for sure, and funny.
yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, like I said, like y'all have me dying laughing. Especially I went back and listened to every Cocoons of Horror to my knowledge, at least all the ones that are available on Stitcher. So I see that for the third season you're gonna be doing sequels. And I don't know if it was you or Anthony, but y'all said to watch the Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo trailer. So
That's
so
right.
so so I went and checked it out. I probably saw the movie, back around the time it came out, but I
Right.
didn't. I don't remember it very well, and I certainly had never seen that trailer before. I gotta say, I appreciate how there was like a narrative arc built into it, and it like ended in a triumphant spirit, and it had like a conclusion. I must say, when it was over, I believed in the beat.
Yeah, that's what's great about it. You don't need to see the movie again, right? Because I mean, you just kind of it pretty much captures it. It's like look at the trailer for Electric Boogaloo as the sort of like the time jumps in House of the Dragon. Like you can just skip right over and you get to the end. You get the idea. Uh, I mean, you get to get more turbo dancing on the ceiling, but and that in and of itself is worth watching. But otherwise, yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, we're doing all sequels. There's gonna be a Halloween launch. We'll do Evil Dead 2 to kick it off.
And you said that people have trouble spelling Cocoons of Horror, and I
Yeah.
could see that like two C's and all that. But do you remember Encyclopedia Brown?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that there was a mystery solved by there was only one word in the English language that had three double letters in a row, and it was bookkeeping. O O
Is that
K
right?
K, yeah, O O
That's
K K
amazing.
E E. So like I have this habit of being about to type in two C's on Cocoons of Horror, but then I know it's not gonna be three double letters in a row because it's not bookkeeping,
That's
which is
amazing.
like a super esoteric, obscure hack. But hey,
I love that. Yeah. Hey, whatever it took. I mean, it's funny what you take from like your childhood, right? Because like certain like growing up, we'd have all those little PSAs, little cartoons that would come out and tell you like not to grab a pot handle if it's on the stove, and like you should always push it aside, and you got to coil up your cord so that kids don't strangle them, like all these like, and those things just stick in my head. And like now as a parent, I'm still moving things, even though my kids are much older, and if they burn themselves on the stove, it's their own fault. But like I push things aside, I do all the things that those things told me. Like hell, I remember Stop, Drop, and Roll. When I caught on fire once, watching like little songs about stop, drop, and roll
mm-hmm.
come to your head, and then I'm like, well, that's funny how these things save your life.
Do you remember when they had those quote unquote hoverboards that didn't hover?
Oh yeah.
And I saw a video where like one of them on the charger caught fire, and ever since then I cannot sleep unless I walk around the house and make sure there's no like it doesn't mind. It's cool if things are plugged in, but things that need to be charged, they all have to be took off the charger. Like I'm scarred from that video.
Oh dude, I bet. No, for sure, I'm the same way. I mean, it doesn't take much to scar me though, so that's
Speaking of Encyclopedia Brown, and then you said you had kids. I'm curious because you're out there in California, right?
yeah.
And I got three kids. One's 18, all that good stuff. And did as a parent, did you notice that the book fairs were a lot more aggressive than when you went to school?
Yeah, the book fairs were always a treat when we were like, I mean, and you could almost miss them. Like they would hand out these little, little pieces of like newsprint, and you'd get your Transformers book or your Mad Libs, but always get the Mad Libs. But yeah, now it's like, I mean, it's almost like going to the fair and having people, like try to get you to play all the different games. And
They'll guilt trip you.
oh yeah, oh yeah, no, it was not.
Like
Yeah.
ask you like questions like, "Do you want your daughter to learn?" Well, yeah.
Well, it's funny, like and it's how things get worded. Like even when I'm at the store, and I'm checking out, and I'll go on the little card reader, it'll say, "Have you? Will you consider donating to hungry families?" And like it gives you a yes or no, and I'm like, "Well, I'll consider it." So I'm like, well, I don't want to hit no because that's like me going, I won't even think about it. But I mean, yes, now it's like, well, how much do you want to give? It's like, whoa, 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 we were just at the consideration phase right now. Just
The
slow your
semantics are
roll.
important here, people.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I thought we were about to engage in a dialogue, and you were going to maybe show me some data, show me some. I want to know what percentage of this is going to the actual hungry families. I'm considering it, but now I have to just say, nope, nope, I won't even think about it.
I never thought of it like that. You got a point. So when y'all were choosing the sequels, it's Predator 2 you picked out of the Predators,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious because listen to a podcast like this, I almost feel like I know you at least as far as like your movie taste.
Hmm.
And did you see Prey?
I haven't seen Prey yet. My son recommends it highly,
Oh,
and
it's really good.
that's what I hear. It's one of those things where it's like between the shows, between some of these other movies, and just like performing or coming home and just trying to veg out, like trying to get the coordination, like trying to get my wife on board with certain things. It's like I gotta convince her to watch some of these sequels she's not interested in. But like, so Prey is one of these things where it's like when we're stressed out, I'm like, hey, you want to watch a violent movie about an old time battle against the predator? And she's kind of, no, not tonight, not tonight. But yeah, it's definitely on the list. And it's yeah. So when we were picking sequels, it was kind of like there wasn't a ton of rhyme or reason to it, right? Because we do jump to like it's not just two. We do I know we do Superman 3 is coming up. Part of it was uh, I like what do I think will have like some really interesting and maybe not just comedic, but wait, something we can talk about, like because Predator 2 sort of fell under the radar, I think, in terms of like all like the whole Predator universe. When I talk to people, like I'll hear more people talk about Alien versus Predator than Predator 2, and when I mention Predator 2 to some people, they're like, yeah, yeah, Adrian Brody. I'm like, no, 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 I'm talking Danny Glover,
Yeah.
and like so that doesn't always like I like a little bit of obscurity. So picking Predator 2 was more of sort of like kind of in line with some of the like more of the pulpy type stuff that we look into.
When y'all were discussing Superman 3, and I was curious. Are you aware that there was supposedly a romantic entanglement, as Jada Pinkett would call it, between Marlon Brando and Richard Pryor? That's been pretty much confirmed.
Is that right? I know that they both would explore the space, but I didn't realize that there was something between the two. And that's now my I can't stop thinking about
Yeah, when
that.
I heard
So
that, yeah, the same thing. Like it. I mean, I don't want to be prurient or anything, but it like dominated my thoughts. Like I just find myself wandering to that every now and then, because
yeah, I
that
want
was
to.
kind
Yeah,
of puzzling, in its execution at the time. Like
yeah.
you just wouldn't anticipate. I mean, I couldn't. I mean, Kevin Hart isn't a good stand-in for Richard Pryor, but like I couldn't imagine like Dave Chappelle being in a movie with Daniel Day Lewis.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. It just doesn't make it. Yeah. So, and then the idea of the romantic entanglement makes it even more like, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, not too much to say about that. I just kind of had a feeling that y'all hadn't heard that, and
No, no, and that now that I have it, thank you for planting the seed. When we do this, when we do Superman 3, we'll probably definitely have to give a shout out, and I'm sure it'll end up in, who knows if it'll make it into the actual pod or the cutting room floor. That's the other thing about our podcast. I mean, there are things that are edited out that I'm like, we should send out the all the outtakes and some of the, because those stories and some of those things are just, they go all over the, like when we do Top Gun Maverick, I'm real curious to see how Anthony edits it, because there was a lot of Kenny Loggins conversation in there, and I don't know how much of that actually would make it to a movie review, but who knows? If that's what he sees as being like the most valuable information, it may come out.
man, I know I'm down for some Kenny Loggins talk. Shoot, maybe make that some Patreon content. So
Oh, for sure.
I want to talk about your stand up journey, but before we get to that, I couldn't really find much of your comedy outside of your YouTube channel, and I'm just curious. Like, I'm not trying to hector you or anything, but like, what's the thought process behind like not putting a special out on YouTube or not having like an album on Spotify?
Yeah, so that's something that is it's probably coming up this year. Anthony and I are talking about that. Like he was talking about helping out with that, maybe doing something like in the Patreon world to make something like that happen. I've had a couple of options that have come up, like some people I know that do recordings, and we've considered it. I don't, and one of the things like I get a lot of heat from my peers. Like everybody I know is throwing stuff on TikTok and Reels and just like the little clips. And I have a bunch of these. It's just a matter of like actually sitting down and doing them, because it's the kind of stuff that it's just the way of the world now. And so there was a school of thought for a while, like when I started, like you don't put your whole act out. You don't put like even
Right.
like 7 minutes out, because then people aren't going to come see you, or they might take your jokes, but now like that completely flipped, right? Like if you're not putting segments, if you're not out every day putting out like 30 seconds 45-second clips, on every platform at a certain time, then you're kind of behind the time. So that's sort of like I've focused mostly on like just doing some of the club work that I do, and then stuff around the Bay Area. But yeah, it's like you're absolutely right to goad me on this, just because other people have done the same thing. Like you're just sitting on. I have all these recordings. I don't even put them up. Like a lot of times, like that YouTube page was initially set up for submitting to festivals. Like you needed to have a link,
Right.
or send it to bookers, and so that's just sort of stayed there. But I have a bunch of newer stuff that I just need to chop up. So it's on the list, and yeah, I anticipate. Next year, I'll do. The question is, if we do an album, or if we want to do I also do like film it. Probably it'll be a combination of both. I have some connections for that. They do a lot of stuff. Where they not only stream it, but they'll press it on vinyl,
Right.
and that becomes something that is a good way. It's a good way also to just have some merch that you can have when you're doing shows, and make a
And
little
let me
extra
lay
money.
some math on you, brother. If you
Mm.
sell your vinyls for $20 each, and you sell 1,000 vinyls, and you should be able to get 4 to 5 thousand, which should get you 1,000 of them. And you can't tell me you couldn't sell 1,000 records. So that's like a
Yeah, so
$15,000 profit every time you do it,
yeah, no, it's true, and yeah. So these are all things that are just it's just a matter
which
of
might
just
afford you more time, which you could then hire the social media manager and get all the
there we
stuff put on
go.
reels.
Yeah, so
But
that's just it. See, I'm inherently lazy. It's part of
I
my
know
like
about it.
it's it's a bit of a superpower of mine. And so it's something that it's like my wife's really good at that. As soon as like I'll start to talk about something, she'll start to get to that. Look, I'm willing to help you, but you you got to do something too. It's like you're just going up there and being funny is part of it, but it's a small part of it. Like I remember doing when I was taking creative writing classes at the university, they were we'd all have all these wonderful stories we write, and our professor was great. She's like, you know what? You're a writer. Writing is the easy part. Getting somebody to care about it, that's going to be the hard part. You got to go out there and pitch it and sell it and try to get anyone to read it. So because like if you're a naturally gifted writer, you're going to write, and that's not going to be a problem. It's that's probably like 10%, 90% is networking, selling, and trying to get anyone to get to page 2, to get to page 3.
Were you doing stand up at the time you were in when you were in college?
No, I wasn't. I would host things. I would do MC work for, bands or, like, different events. Fundraisers was a big thing that I would do. But I wasn't doing stand up. Like I did it for like a couple times, hated it, so I just said I'd never do it again. But I wasn't really. I hadn't found my voice. I hadn't found what I was trying to be. I think I was trying to be. I think I was trying, like, as a dad, and trying to maintain a certain image. I think I got a little bit maybe more uh, concerned about how I was perceived, and so I very bland type humor, and I felt like I was doing more of an impersonation of a comic than actually being a comic. So I just stopped, focused on writing, and then after a while, I started reading my essays. I'm like, I wonder if I could convert these into stand up. And so you take, like, 3-page essay and you distill that down to like maybe a 2-minute bit, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, I have a closer, great. So that's that. And now I've found, like, after a while I was like, am I plagiarizing myself? Is that a thing? But like I'm taking stuff that I've written for other purposes but not converting them. And so then now it's like, oh, this is who I am. I'm a little more talk about myself, a little more maybe a touch more vulnerable on some of the things, and try to find the absurdity in just the real life, which is, that's more than anything, that's just comedy. But when it becomes my real life, as opposed to like trying to come up with an observation, like, oh, well, Seinfeld does this, I'll do that. I'm like, nah, that's not who I am.
Yeah, I, I take it stand up comedy isn't something where you really want to follow the crowd or worry about your respectability level. It's so many podcasts these days where there's comedians on that talk about how they got into comedy and what they do. And I want to ask you some questions I've always wanted to ask, that I'm coming from a place of ignorance, so if it sounds stupid, excuse me. But like when they say it takes like a year to make an hour, and I don't want to criticize anybody, but to me that seems kind of sparse. Like it seems like you should be able to come up with more than an hour in a year. And I know that there's so many people that say that there must be a reason for it. So I'm curious as to, like, what's the reason?
So it's first, I know a lot of people that have been in comedy for maybe a decade, and they're still working to get that 20 minutes. And there's a couple of things that go into it. One, it's about reps, right? And like how many opportunities do you get to try new material? Um, Open mics are a great spot for trying out new material, but what ends up happening is more often than not, open mics are more populated by other comics. So
Right.
you may be writing jokes that comics like,
But real
and
people don't like them.
yeah, and they
They
don't
don't
necessarily
get them.
translate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so there's that part of it, right? And then, like, if you're doing, because most of the shows we do aren't great. We're doing bar shows, we're doing maybe some rowdy events and this and that. And so now you're like, oh, I'm doing more crowd work now just to try to survive than I am trying to do some of my material. So sometimes that just gets delayed in getting to know if the material is working. Once you hit a point where, like I'm fortunate, I get to be at the San Francisco Punchline quite a bit, and so if I'm up there, I can, like, okay, now I got a hot audience, I got a hot crowd, I've got these 3 jokes I know are going to work. Now I'm going to throw this new one in because now I'm playing with house money,
Right.
but I've also got an audience that is savvy, and if this joke works, then I know, okay, this is one I'm going to keep in there. So it's just sometimes it's those opportunities. It's a matter of sitting down and writing, because I mean sometimes you'll sit down and, like, it's this thing I think is fascinating about comedy is that when you first start out, you start to build your time, you build your set, and it's based on, like I said, things like from an essay or this or that. Like, I never actually sat down to go, I'm going to write stuff out of thin air. It's stuff you pull. And then later you're like, well, I need new material. So now I'm like, well, I'm going to go to a coffee shop. I'm going to sit down with my notepad and I'm going to do a thing that I've never done before and think it's going to work. I'm just going to sit here and write new jokes. And I'm like, well, that's not how I got here, right? So you have to sort of like break out of that and try to get my recommendation for a lot of comics is don't just hang out around comics, because you'll be running material on each other that makes comics laugh. We have a very different sensibility in terms of like what makes us laugh. I said get out and be with real people, be in the real world the way that you were before you were doing comedy, because then you that's how you get the inspiration and that's what you get. So sometimes, like, I mean, if you're a full-time comic and that's all you do, sitting around and maybe finding a way to get inspired and write jokes and take risks, uh, is a little bit easier because you've got sort of that bandwidth. But if you're got a day job, you're running podcasts, you're trying to book shows as well as be on shows, you get a good gig and you're like, well, I don't know if I want to try anything new out because I really want to show out really well here. So there's just a variety of different things that kind of get in the way of that. But most comics that have been around for like 5 years or less, they'll tell you they have an hour plus, and they're lucky if they got 5 minutes.
Hmm, okay, well, fair enough. And then another thing, I heard you talk up, bring up crowd work. Well, it seems like on the, I guess, top tier, upper echelon, or let's say the more established comedians, they seem very disparaging of people to engage in crowd work, and I don't understand why.
It's an interesting dynamic, right? It's some people think crowd work is a cheat. Like if you're decent at crowd work, you're always going to get a little bit. I shouldn't say always, but generally you're going to get a little more forgiveness on your crowd work. Like if your crowd work's not top notch, but they know that it's happening real time, people appreciate their sort of like in the moment thing.
Right.
So crowd work becomes something that really feels like you had to be there. Now people are doing a lot of crowd work, or they're doing like destroying the heckler, and they're putting that out on YouTube, and that does pretty well. But people start to wonder, like, is that manufactured? Is it really crowd work? Is it crowd work that maybe you and I've had it where I do things like you do want something once and you go, hey, that worked really well as a riff, and then you'll do it again later like it's a riff again. People see you a couple times like, hey, that's not a riff, that's a bit now, right? And so there's a
Gotcha.
little bit of that. I think crowd work is something that is, I mean, I don't think you can do too much of it, but I think it's a real necessary thing. I think it helps you exercise a muscle of being present, because it's so easy to just get through your material. I know my set, I might mix it up a little bit, but if I think crowd work helps me have more fun even with my own material, because now I'm off script. The audience knows I'm off script. Now we're all kind of in this together. So when I go back to my material, it almost feels like like they're a part of that too. And being like when you're funny in real life, you're not thinking about your audience necessarily. You're just being funny. But when you get on stage, you just get into such a different mindset that you're like, I got to just get through my lines, and it feels more like you're doing a play sometimes than it is going up there and being funny. And so crowd work, I think, helps exercise that muscle that of just being present and allowing whatever comes your way to sort of take off. And then it reminds you, like, yeah, I mean, if I can be funny around my friends, chopping it up around the dinner table, I should be that same guy as up here on stage.
Right.
You just sort of have to change that mindset a little bit.
So like it seems like an inordinate amount of comedy is like getting out of your own way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like, because overthinking, like you talk about over analyzing a
Over
show,
analyzing, overthinking, being
over
just when you
analyzing
should
your
be
set.
relaxed.
Oh yeah, like I used to when I first started out, I'd have my iPad out, I'd have my set list out, I'd be watching the crowd. Do they like this? Do they like that? Okay, I'm gonna move this around, and I'm like over here like Minority Report, just changing all my set around, and that would become a little bit like Dumbo's feather, right? Because like for a while I was like, oh, I gotta always have this here, I gotta always have that here, and then like one day I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna go to the show and I'll just figure it out when I get there. I know my material. I know other things that I have that I haven't tried. Like it's all there, Osburne. You got it. Just figure it out. And since then, I mean, I'll look at my set list every once in a while just to make sure that I'm like, okay, am I? Sometimes you forget something and you're like, oh, I really wish I would have done that. So I just do a quick little list of all my little notes that I might have, and then see which ones I want to do. But otherwise, I like to go up there and go, I don't know what I'm gonna do tonight. Just see what the audience is into. Oh, I like to keep an eye on what the comics before me are doing, just so I don't step on any material or duplicate it
Right.
necessarily. Um, which is that. Speaking of crowd work, nothing is worse when you watch somebody go up later and ask people like what they do for a living. It's like, yeah, we already talked about that like two comics ago, and so now it feels super disjointed, and so now the people are starting to detach because they want it all to feel like it's all homogenous and everybody's working together for the same, rowing in the same direction.
Does bombing really feel as bad as they make it out to?
Oh, it. The only way bombing doesn't feel bad is if somebody like you're with somebody who's also bombing, because then you can sit there and afterwards be like, yeah, that crowd sucked. But there's
Yeah.
nothing worse than bombing and then watching the next person go up there and do well because you're like, oh no, that was me, that was me.
And there's
But
like
it,
nobody that doesn't care, like it doesn't bother them. Like it seemed like there'd be like at least one exception to prove the rule.
I think some people, it's hard to say because I think some people are, if you're maybe like if you're doing this full time and you're out there like 5 6 nights a week doing multiple shows, it's you got another one, right? Like it's like a
Right.
cornerback who gives up a touchdown, right? Like I'm going to be in on the next play, I'll get it this time, right? But if you're maybe a little more sporadic and you're like, okay, I've got like maybe 2 3 shows this week, or this is my next show, but I've got like 2 weeks off, whether for whatever reason, and you bomb, it's like, oh, now you got 2 weeks to think about. Well, should I quit? When do I? Was that it? Is that the one I want to end on? So it really depends. Like to be honest, most of the
Bro.
time, if you've been doing this long enough and you can look at your success ratio, uh, you can look at a bomb and go, okay, look, that I may just not have been what the crowd wanted. Like, I mean, like, if I go to if you go to a concert and you're like, okay, cool, we're gonna, Megadeth is about to play, but then Kenny G's gonna open, he might bomb,
Yeah.
but he may be crushing it, right? I mean, he may be crushing Songbird, and everybody was like, but it's just not what they're into.
Upon reflection, was there ever a time that it was the crowd, not you?
Yes, yes, and I don't say that all that often because a lot of times I'm like, I probably could have done better. Like you look at opportunities and say, what could I have done to switch that up? Because like nothing beats turning a room, like a room that seems hostile and all the comics haven't done well. But if you
Like Bernie Mac.
observed, yeah, yeah, if you can do that, the turning a room is even if it's not like a crusher, but it's like that audience seemed like they were unwinnable and you won. Nothing quite beats that. But yeah, there have been nights where like we did a show not too long ago, and it ended up being it was at a Vietnamese restaurant in Northern California, and there was no stage. The where we were performing was right where people where they were doing the receipts, and so like the wait staff is just sitting there talking behind you. Everybody was hammered. An older woman came up to me and started to twerk on me, and I was just like, it just became one of those things where
As
like, this
one
is just
does at the Vietnamese restaurant when there's a stand-up
exactly,
comedy show.
when in Rome. And so we're I mean, at this point, you're like, oh, this is not like I don't know why this crowd is here for comedy. They're in their own world. It's and everybody struggled, right? So we could all walk away and just go, okay, we're not defined by this. But then and my buddy was like, what could we have done different? I'm like, we could have turned it down. Like that's the only thing that we could have done differently because that was not gonna happen. It was just one of those things where this crowd is in a whole other plane. And I don't maybe crowd. I even tried crowd work, and that's trying crowd work. That's when I ended up getting assaulted by a woman on stage. So I'm like, all right, maybe inviting people to engage was a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah. Upon reflection, what's your opinion of roast?
So this has actually come up quite a bit because roasts are becoming more popular, like for rentals for like because of clubs. A lot of times what they'll do is like you can rent it midweek, and then people try to recoup their rental money by bringing trying to promote it and get people to come in. So roasts have become really popular around here, and it's an interesting one because I think I know some people I've worked with some folks that have like written for a Comedy Central roast you watch them and you watch how they operate and like it is an art form and it's a throwback especially right now we're in a much more uptight culture so roasts can
Yeah,
really feel like you're going in the deep end of the pool without any waiters but the I have a mixed feelings about it because like sometimes you see these roasts and like or especially out here I'm like well here are two comics you never heard of talking trash to each other and it can sometimes feel just very much like oh look yeah you're fat or you look it becomes it can lead to some of like the lowest common denominator type low hanging fruit approach but if you get a really good roast battle and you get a real sharp insult I mean I personally, I can write them. I don't do roasts because I think I'm just too. I'm probably too thin skinned, or as my wife would put it, you might get too mean. Like if I feel like I'm backed in a corner, like I'm like,
Right.
oh, that like you went after something that like you knew something about them, and you you just wanted to hurt their feelings and their soul, and so I have to like sort of keep that in check. But I mean, otherwise, like I appreciate a good roast. Um, I've watched some of these audiences though for some of these like unknown comics. Like, what am I watching? Who are these people? You know, it doesn't. It can sometimes feel a little bit self indulgent, but
Sometimes it's kind of exploitative too. Like
oh yeah,
I don't want to say the wrong thing, but people with disabilities or whatever, they bring people like that into some of them, and it just doesn't quite feel right. Even
right.
though
And
it's one time the guy was fun was I was about to say so much shit was really funny.
yeah, no, and I've seen that too, and like and I know that like sometimes you know, people are signing up knowing that that's going to be what's on there, and then sometimes it puts the roaster in an awkward spot too, right? Like, hey, this is who you're
Yeah,
going against, and it's like, well, how do you not, right? Like, I mean, like you can't avoid it, but at the same time, it's like, who you going to be tonight, you know? And this is probably going to go on a reel, and now you know, if especially if you don't know the person real well, like some of these, like I said, some of these roast battles are like two people that don't know each other, so they just like again they're making fun of like what they see,
right.
or you know, and that's fine. But it's usually better like roast that I experience that I enjoy better is like if the people know each other, so there's already a like a built-in camaraderie, and you know that they know what they're into or what they're about to get into. But yeah, if you start propping people up just for now you're just getting it feels like clickbait. You know, you put these easy targets up there, and I don't know. It's not for everybody. I mean, it's definitely an acquired. Like I mean, some of these Comedy Central roasts too. You're just like they're. I understand it's like an old school approach, and these are celebrities, so that's a little bit different, right? You kind of feel
Right.
like you don't see celebrities as real people half the time, but
R.I.P.
it's
Joan
a
Rivers.
little
She
bit.
used to be the queen of the roast.
Yeah, oh for sure, man. She was, and that's the thing is it is an art form back then, and it's like there are definitely like people that really capture that spirit now, and they make it it feel like it's a throwback, but contextually it's just a different world, right? And so it's like I think we're trained to cringe more than maybe we would in the past,
Yeah.
so it's a hard one to just take it at face value, and it's hard sometimes to know. It's like, well, if there's not like a little twinkle in the eye where they're having fun with it, it's like, is this just now you're just being mean? And if
Yeah.
that's it, then you know, I don't know, it just makes it a little bit hard to swallow sometimes.
The I guess cancel culture would be the way to put it. Is it really affected things as much? Like, sometimes you hear comedians complain that they have to edit their material too much. And sometimes I wonder if like more of a big deal is made of it than it really is.
I think so. I think it's a little bit blown out of proportion. I mean, like, look, I'm performing in the Bay Area, so we're talking about you know a heightened sense of liberality, and probably a heightened sense of, and like the thing about wokeness is one of these things where people aren't really sure what to do with it. Like some folks are just over the top with it. Some people are like fine with whatever. And I mean, I perform in the Bay Area. I have personally have not run into any situations where like it went over the top. I have had some issues on the other side where I've seen like if you make any joke maybe that is pointed towards like a conservative angle, I've had more conservatives be upset than I have with liberals, and maybe it's because liberals are just so liberal they feel like they can't even be upset. I don't know, but it's a whole it's a trying to go like I try to go kind of middle of the road with it, you know, like let's everybody's fair game because that's kind of the comedy I grew up with where you know everything's up for jokes. Um, I think I hear more of the like the cancel culture complaining. You look at the comic and you're like, yeah, but you're just trying to be edgy. So you're not getting booked because you're there's not a lot of humor in it. It's just like a shock value thing. So cancel culture becomes an easy thing to say if maybe you're not getting, you know, your material's not hitting. You go, oh well, it's because you know I'm getting these people want to cancel me. It's like you're not special enough to be canceled. They just don't want to see you. There's a difference.
And it
There's a
seems like
difference.
when you get canceled, it kind of helps your career. Like like tell me the comedian that got canceled for saying something they shouldn't have, that then immediately get booked in just alternative venues.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Like you hear, like, oh, they're canceling Chappelle. Like, yeah, to the
Nah,
tune of how many millions of dollars? Yeah, I mean, he pops into Punchline and he it
I mean, they
sells
get
out
kicked.
within
They get
minutes.
kicked off Twitter or something. Because even if something like that, I mean, I don't know if he did or not. I don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But
I don't.
even if he did, I don't think that would really hurt his feelings too much. Like,
No,
it
and
doesn't
that's
matter if you
and
get kicked off Twitter if you're still on Netflix.
exactly, and that's I mean, I think Louis C.K. is probably the closest one to anyone being able to go, oh well, he got canceled. But it's like again, that wasn't so much of what he said,
Right.
and there was
He didn't get, yeah,
time
it
in
wasn't his comedy that got him canceled. I mean, that's something different. Like,
right,
I'm
exactly.
talking about like, if you say the wrong thing on stage or in an interview, like, sexual misconduct is that's just
Yeah,
a whole nother
exactly.
arena.
Right, and but again, it's like that's where I think we get really excited about comics being canceled. But like I when I hear about comics being canceled, and it's usually right alongside, like you said, with their upcoming tour that's selling out, and you're like, that's a if only I could be canceled like that. That'd be great.
Yeah. The only thing that like I don't understand about wokeness is like when I hear all these like white people talking so disparagingly against white people, and I'm like, so you're gonna end racism by being racist against your own race?
It's funny. It's the way I put it is that white guilt is also a pretty interesting form of white privilege, where
Yeah.
a lot of times and that's what you see, and look, I love the Bay Area, but like there is a lot of sense of I need to be offended on behalf of somebody else who didn't ask for my help, right? So it's
Right.
like, so I'll run into like, if you go into a more diverse crowd, I find that you have much more free range to cover all kinds of topics and take some risks. But if the audience is primarily white, that's where I'll find some of the more uptight, because they're like, are we, like they're constantly looking for, how are we supposed to react to this? How are we, is he allowed to say this, or should we, what should we do? And like, just sit down and, enjoy your 2 drink minimum and have a good time. Like that's one of the things that I think is probably a bigger issue, and because like I said, the more diverse the crowd, usually the more game they are for whatever, and it's funny because being in like Northern California, it tends to be primarily white. So then I started doing more shows in the city, and I was kind of nervous, and I'm like, this is actually much easier because, like I said, the wider swath of the crowd, the like just it's just a better show. It tends to be like,
I,
especially if you're going to touch on race, and like I touch on race, but I do it in a like talk about it, right? Like these aren't racist jokes; these are jokes about race. But like you get a crowd that is overly sensitive, and they just a mentioning of the of that race is real, they'll get really uptight and go, oh, we're not allowed to do this. We can't do it. And I'm like, yeah, we are. It's okay.
how do those people end up in a comedy club? Like, that
That's
just seems like the last place that you would bring that mindset.
that's the question. A lot of times, like when you talk about like bombing and looking back, most of the time you're like, when you run into a crowd like that, like, why are you here? Like, why
Like
would
go to the
you?
library and complain that they have Mein Kampf.
I mean, it's wild that because yeah, you're like, I don't know, like, well, did you all win tickets? Like, how did you get in here, right? And I think maybe it's they're used to like because comedy is on a like there's a comedy boom, like we do streaming channels, Netflix, and so many different ways to access comedians, but you also can kind of go through and pick and choose what you like and go, I'm only going to watch the stuff I like, and then you go to a comedy club, and some of these clubs, it's like you may see, like I do a Sunday showcase at Punchline, and I mean, it's truly like it's a showcase. Like there'll be anywhere between like 10 to 12 comics that are like representing the Bay, so you're gonna get all kinds of different voices. And with something like that, it's like a buffet. You're like, okay, well, I like this, I don't like that. But when you go to a show and they don't, it's like I didn't like. Did you not expect like irony and sarcasm and that? I mean, that's kind of what we do, but it blows my mind how many people will be at a show and have no idea what to expect, and then get upset because it's comedy.
Yeah, like I told you in the email that I went to the Dan Soder show, and the comic in the middle was talking about incest in relation to like Pornhub statistics. When they have that yearly Pornhub, they
Hmm.
release like the most watched stuff. And I'm not gonna say I mean, I don't get offended by it, but I kind of find that the incest shit so distasteful that I don't extract much humor from it. But like at no point would that, like, I just didn't laugh that much at that
Right.
part, and the rest of his set was funny. And at no point would I ever think that, like talk about being self-important, like to get up and stop to tell the comic on stage that you shouldn't say that,
Yeah.
that's egotistical.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me, right? When you see someone with that kind of like, I mean, I've had people shake off something like if I mentioned something, whether it's in politics or something that's in the news, and like, and again, that's not really what I do. So like, it shows up every once in a while, and usually it's like, just give me a second, you'll probably find out that it'll be funny because it's probably going to be more absurd than it is. Like, I'm not a preachy comic. I mean, I have my
Right.
own opinions in real life, and sometimes it comes out a little bit on stage, but for the most part, I know that in the especially the politically divided world that we're in right now, like political humor doesn't like either side's not like everyone kind of wants a break, you know. So
Yeah.
like when I look at going to a comedy show, I'm like, used to be like, oh, you could watch a show and it'll talk about the president or this or that, and everyone would laugh regardless of how you voted. Now you just can't do that, and because both sides are just so uptight and they're looking for a fight, and so I try to steer away from that because it's like, look, you all want to break. I get it. You watch enough news, you get enough, alerts on your phone. Let's just like give it a break and relax. But like like I said, there are times like something happens in the news, you want to bring it up. Like I did a joke that was like so benign about like Obamacare, and it wasn't even to do a joke about like to talk about Obamacare, but it was to get to a pun about FDR being in a wheelchair. And so it's like this journey that gets to a point where it's like, look, just give me a second. The joke is really dumb, but it's kind of funny, and it usually works. But like I was at this place, and as soon as I said Obamacare, and this is a setup, like it's like a three-pronged setup, just to set up the concept of what I was getting at. A guy just was set up, nope, not here, not here, and I'm like,
Whoa.
give me a second. And they're like, oh, yeah, you don't mention his name here. I'm like, he's not Voldemort. Like he is the president, and just give me a second. We're going to get to a joke,
Sounds like a
and that
guy who proctors SATs for amusement.
but yeah, that's what's crazy, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's like you. It's certainly. I mean, I had a guy want to fight me because I made a joke about people that have cats don't leave the house, and I thought a guy he was gonna like his partner had to hold him back. He's like trying to rush the stage, so it's like you never know what. And again, about the like
I mean, his
if
defense, he hadn't left the house in like a year.
exactly exactly, yeah, I get it. I mean, he probably had too much catnip before he got here, and I understand,
I got to at least talk about some rap on every episode. So I have curiosity, who's your favorite rapper, and what's the rap album that you've consumed the most in your lifetime?
Wow, that is an amazing question. So, like, I mean, when I say I'm an old school guy, like, that's just for real, right? Like, I mean, Beastie Boys was what it was like a soundtrack of my life. And it was such an important, like, because like, I was into them, but it was like Check Your Head and Beyond is when I really fell in love with that, with what they were doing at that point. They bring a little bit more of the punk roots in, a little bit like more of that lo-fi sound I was really into. So, like, when it comes to, like most of my album consumption these days would be like Tribe would be I
I
like
was about to say, I had you pegged for a tribe guy.
yeah, so I mean it was just like, and it's funny because like my kids are so funny because they grew up with like we grew up, we were, my wife and I were very we were going to church, we were trying to create a certain, like we got married young, and so we wanted to really create a wholesome atmosphere, but there was just like there was too much there was too much bad Christian music, so I had like that's kind of like helped why we moved back towards like we
Like
would listen
Striper.
to Striper, yes, DC Talk, all that good stuff, and so like
Ah,
I
DC
so
Talk. I forgot about them.
so my kids, my son especially has really deep appreciation for Tribe, and that definitely comes through in like because one of my first concerts I went to in high school, it was Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. They were double headliners. Souls of Mischief was there, and so those like I was all about that. So we were at the Warfield in San Francisco, and talking about white dudes, like there was the three of us, and but it was such a great night. It was like it left such a mark on me that I just like that that whole era of hip hop was so like to the point where I'm like, oh, I gotta go to New York. Like that was the kind of like kind of impact that it had. And so for sure, definitely try. And I dabble with a lot of the newer stuff too. Like I try. I mean, I it's funny. My wife, when I met her, she was like kind of into country and oldies, but now she's like she loves her hip hop, and so it's pretty funny how. And some of the hip hop she likes is just really funny. But like we bought a record player for the first time in a long time. Like oh, we're going vinyl again, and I was at the record store, and like again, this is well after the fact, but I bought Damn, and I got home and had a little whiskey, and my son's like, you're finally getting into this. I'm like, well, I'm giving it a shot. And I got out of the room after listening to, I probably flipped the sides probably like 3 times, and I was like, wow, damn, like that was like that really got me. I mean, I was so it's funny, and again, I was kind of a late adopter to that because I still tend to live in my retro world a lot, as you know from Cocoons of Horror and some of
Right.
the other things I know, and most of my references are fairly outdated. But yeah, definitely Tribe. Like I said, going back even further with Beastie Boys, and again, Beasties I saw at Lollapalooza when I was just out of high school. So it's like I have these fond memories. I saw Far Side perform. I used to love Far Side back in the day. So that's another one that my son wears out. He wears out Bizarre Ride to the Far Side all the time. So it's pretty funny. And he's
Man,
26.
that's bad. Your son got good taste.
Yeah, he's all right.
Is you think it'd be fair to say that Vanilla Ice had the most spectacularly comedic rap moment in cinematic history?
Go Ninja, go Ninja, go. I mean that was. I mean he's got like so not
Yeah,
only does
that
he
his
have
movie. I didn't even.
oh
Now I was talking about Go Ninja Go, but
Cool
I
as
think
Ice.
yeah, but what are those movies where the like people talk while they watch it and they make fun of it?
Oh, like because like that Mystery Science Theater, yeah,
Yeah,
the
but there's
Rib
one that's
Tracks.
like on Amazon for free, and they got didn't they have a movie called To the Extreme? Or
Oh,
maybe
I think he did.
yeah, and he was like riding a motorcycle, and
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's that, and we watched that not too long. Well, I said not too long. It was probably a couple years ago. And because, I mean, I love bad movies, and that's such a specifically bad movie. And
yes,
it's just, it's you look back and like, 'cause I watch a lot of Elvis movies too because it's such a fascinating thing. And when they were just like, whoa, man, he's so popular. What else do we do? We'll just put him in every piece of media that we could find. And so like Vanilla
Lemonade.
Ice. Exactly. So Vanilla Ice had that moment where they're like, "That he's marketable. Just put him on a motorcycle and see what happens." And that was it. He's like, "We won't do that again." But I love that. I love to see a performer doing something that they shouldn't. In the same way, like when Don Johnson had a music album, I love that because that's just awful. And he was and Bruce Willis had was it Bruno's Back or something? He had a whole album, and
Oh, I
of
heard
course
Don
Eddie
Johnson. I
Murphy.
didn't know Bruce Willis.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I love stuff like that too. I love stuff like that. I gotta hear Bruce Willis. What
yeah.
would
One
you
of my
say his musical style would be?
he tries to be bluesy, a lot of harmonica. If you do yourself a favor and look up any Seagram's commercials with Bruce Willis back in the '80s,
Oh,
like for gold, like Seagram's wine coolers, because there's one where he's singing, and that's amazing. He's singing on a porch with some guys, and I'll sing that song all the time. And there's just he. The Bruce Willis at the height of his powers in the '80s, like right when Moonlighting
like
was
yeah.
kicking off, and like when Die Hard, like there was nobody like he did so much for a receding hairline that I had hope for the first time as a young child knowing that I was going to lose my hair. Like I saw him, I'm like, see, it can be done, it can be done. But yeah, look up the Seagram's commercials. There's not a bad one. They're all like some are just a lot of dancing, and they're very sensual. It's a
Oh, that
it's a
sounds
great journey.
fabulous. That sounds utterly fabulous. Man, Bruce Willis Seagram's commercials are essential. You have got me sold. Before we go, do you have anything coming up you'd like to plug?
um, I mean, not really. A lot of stuff is like just kind of. I got some local stuff, like I'm headlining shows here in like in Sonoma County that are coming up, which is fun. But I definitely stay tuned for the season of Cocoons of Horror is coming out, and we will be discussing. I know Anthony's going to be jumping back onto the Electric Boogaloo and helping with the Game of Thrones feed over on Bald Move, and so I think that's where we may be discussing potential like Patreon or something along those lines for an album. And because it's funny, like with the podcast, you get people like, "Hey, you come out here, you're gonna come out there," and it's like, "Oh, you got to line some dates up or whatever." So that might be another thing that I focus on in the next year is Anthony and I've talked about maybe doing some of these interviews and stuff that we do, but like maybe actually get out and go together and do some live podcasts. Like that'd be a fun way to do it too.
I bet y'all would get a great reaction if you did a live podcast and you had the medieval expert field questions from the audience and everything. I could
Yeah,
definitely see that going over really good.
Yeah, so that's what I'd like to see happen, because I mean we have a lot. I mean, obviously Anthony and I have known each other for decades, right? So we go way back. So it's just kind of fun to like circle back, and you know, even though he's in Ohio and I'm in California, that's the beauty of one thing that the pandemic really helped us understand is how close we can get through technology, and so now we're able to watch movies and talk it up like we would back when we were in high school. So it's pretty great.
Yeah, well, I definitely look forward to the next season, and thank you so much for your time, brother. Like I said, as far as making me laugh, you are easily my number one podcaster. So this has been an honor
Oh
and
my
a
god,
privilege for me.
thank you so much. It's amazing.
No
Appreciate it,
doubt,
man.
no doubt. Well, I look forward to what you got coming up, and have a great rest of the day.
All right, you too. Thanks for having me.
No doubt, anytime.
Welcome to the Super Facts Show on the Super Facts Network. I just appreciate you listening. So I'm not going to ask you to follow me on Instagram at Mark Waldo Ward. I'm not going to ask you to rate and review the show. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe to it. Thank you for your time.